Good afternoon. I should say late afternoon, everyone. Today is August 17th, 2023. This is a special session of your Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas Board of Commissioners. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to announce that we have individuals participating remotely as well as on site. All participants joining by phone should mute your phones when not speaking to avoid any background noise. During the meeting, please make sure that you announce yourself by name and title every time you speak so the public that is participating knows exactly who is speaking. This is critical given the number of remote participants and is current guidance from the Kansas Attorney General's office. While speaking, please make sure that you speak directly into the microphone to ensure that your comments are being heard, and make sure that you speak at a level that is audible so that an accurate record can be made by our clerk. I'll now call this meeting to order. Clerk, can you announce the meeting and roll call, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. You are hereby notified that I've called a special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County and Kansas City, Kansas to be conducted in a hybrid format on Thursday, August 17th, 2023 at 5 p.m. in the 5th floor conference room of the Municipal Office Building for a budget workshop. Roll call. Markley. States. Davis.
Here.
Fine.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Commissioner Townsend has an absence memo. McKiernan.
Here.
Ramirez has an absence memo as well. Johnson.
Here.
Kane. Garner.
Here, thank you, clerk. This evening, tonight's meeting will be a continuation of our ongoing budget workshops that are being presented by our staff, led by our county administrator. And I'll turn it over to our county administrator, Mr. David Johnson, and he will lead the meeting from here.
If you recall, last week, we gave an overview of the county administrator's recommended budget to the commission. In that discussion, there were requests from individual commissioners that wanted to start off the next phase of the discussion because I presented the budget to them. It's in the commissioner's hands to finalize a budget that will be the unified government's budget. So we're going to turn it over to Reggie Lindsay to guide our process tonight. Reggie.
Good evening, everyone. Some of the things that Debbie Johnson and I are going to cover tonight are we're going to drill down into the total budget, talk about what the differences are from 2023's budget to 2024's budget. And then we're also going to drill down into the county general fund and the city general fund and talk about what the differences are between what we forecasted back on May 18th compared to what we proposed. And then we're also going to talk about a few things that were requested last week. One of them were to drill down into or look into the county general fund, what it looks like with a 2 mil cut. Also look at the county general fund, how it looks at a revenue neutral status. And then look at the city general fund with a 2 mil cut, and also look at it at a revenue neutral status. And then we'll look at the city general fund with the BPU rate increase, taking that funding out and putting it on the expense side. And then we're going to look at outside agencies, and also we have a number of different expenses to look at just in case we want to do some modeling. We have come prepared today to do some modeling on the expense side and the revenue side with everyone. So that is what we plan today. So to start out, we're going to talk about the 2024 proposed budget. It's a $466 million budget. Last year, the budget that we proposed was a $432 million budget. So that's about a $33 million increase. So on the screen, we see where we have other tax levy funds that are 17% of the budget. They total about $79 million. And that includes the city bond and interest fund, the county bond and interest fund, and also parks and rec. And then we have our enterprise funds. These are our funds that provide services to the community that run on their own. They don't have any funding that comes from it from taxes. It's charges for services that they provide. And then they also are fully capable of running themselves. So some of the funds that are in there are the sewer fund, Sunflower Hills, and then also our solid waste fund, and then also our stormwater fund. And then we have our special revenue funds, which are about $27 million. Some of the funds over there are dedicated sales tax, also our special street and highway fund, and then our alcohol fund. And then we have the city general fund, which is a $180 million budget. And then we have the county general fund, which is an $84 million budget. So one of the things, Debbie Johnson, I'm gonna turn it over to her. She's going to drill down into and tell you what the differences were in the $466 million budget we presented last week compared to the $432 million budget we presented for 2023's budget.
Good evening, Debbie Johnson, interim CFO. So as Reggie said, I'm going to talk about the expenditures. We have a graph showing the 10 funds that had the largest changes between 2023 and the 2024 proposed budget. I've got several slides where I'm going to talk about the differences. The graph is the same on each one of the slides, but I'll go through each one of those. So the first one we'll talk about is the new sci-fi fund, which is the infrastructure funding that's going to come from the county mill levy. We dedicated a mill over to that fund that will be used for infrastructure improvements between Kansas City, Kansas, Bonner Springs, and Edwardsville. That fund was not in existence last year, so that's a new increase. The stormwater fund is up about, and I will say on the sci-fi, the increase is about equal to one county mill, which is just under $2 million. The stormwater fund is up about 3.87 million. And that is due to additional capital improvements that have been added to the budget in response to the rate structure that was also put in place starting, the rate started increasing in 2022 with the new rate structure for 2024 that starts with the impervious surface. Travel and tourism is up about 3 million. We've got additional capital improvements that are included there. The Rock Island Bridge development had commitments that are coming from that fund, as well as Memorial Hall renovations and the greenhouse beautification pilot project. On the next slide, we're going to talk about dedicated sales tax, which is up about 3.6 million. We're spending about an additional 2.3 million on the public safety fleet, which is coming from this fund. This fund is the revenue source is sales tax. So with the increases built in there, there was room for additional fleet, as well as we've shifted some other expenses from the city general fund over to this fund. Parks and Recreation is up about 800,000. There were 2 new positions created in 2024 for the Parks and Rec. There was a marina specialist and a program manager. We also shifted 3 positions that were in the Special Parks Fund over to Parks and Rec. That's not an increase to the overall budget, but it increases the Parks and Rec General Fund. But then we also added some additional capital onto the Special Parks and Rec Fund. And then the City Bond and Interest Fund is up about 2.5 million, and this just reflects increases in the additional debt service cost. The next slide, we'll talk about the City General Fund. It's up about 9.6 million. There is funding for 30 plus positions in this fund. 17 of them are part of a SAFER grant. That is the grant's expiring. So now we are picking up the cost for those additional firefighters. There were also 9 new positions for Station 15, which is the one in Fairfax. So those, and that accounts for about 26 positions. And there are several others throughout the organization that are funded there. We've also got commitments for employee compensation, increased funding on capital for replacing the fleet, and then additional funding that was added to the Parks and Recreation fund transfer. The county general fund's up about 3.75 million. The majority of this is due to the sheriff's parity pay that was added at the end of last year and then added to the 2023 budget and going forward. And the last one is the sewer system fund, which is up about 1.7 million. increased funding for their fleet, as well as funding for additional CIP related to the CSO consent decree. Then the last one I'm going to talk about, Reggie's going to start talking about the fund forecast and the fund balance. So we thought we would just go over remind everyone of the fund balance policy that we have. This policy was approved in 2018. There was a resolution passed by the commission that authorized various budgetary and financial policies. And one of them was the general fund operating and economic uncertainty reserve policy. And so just reminding everyone that the operating reserve is a 2-month reserve, which equates to just under 17%. And then we have the economic uncertainty, which is an additional 1 month or 8% for a total reserve level of 25%, which is what we have strived. We are striving to keep our fund balance at that percentage. And turn it back over to Reggie to talk about the funds.
Thank you, Debbie. I want to start out with the city general fund. So we have is 2 columns and we have the what we forecasted on May 25th initially to the elected body for the city general fund. And then we also have what we proposed on August 10th, which was last Thursday. So when we first started the budget process back in May, we initially thought that the city general fund was going to be $10.5 million structurally imbalanced. So what we want to do is talk about those differences there, where in 2024's proposed budget, the structural imbalance now is only $732,000. Some of the main things that happened there were our total revenues went from $161 million to $169 million. And then our total expenses did drop from $171 million to $169 million. So some of the key things that happened in there were after we got to digging into the budget, we found that our sales projections were low. So we jumped our sales projections up, sales tax projections up by 8.1%, which is about $4.2 million. Initially, we had forecasted $52 million. And so now that forecast is equal to $57 million. And then also, as we were going through the process, our BPU pilot projections, we found that we thought they were a little lower than what they should have been. And then also BPU did have its rate increase that happened. So initially, we were estimating $36 million in revenue from the pilot. And we ended up upping it to $39 million, which is a 7.5% increase, or about $2.7 million. And then natural gas franchise tax projections, they did grow. We initially were estimating $2.6 million, and that number has grown 35% to $3.5 million, which is about $920,000. And then also our occupation business tax projections grew there about 68%. We initially were estimating 1.9 million, and it went up to 2.4 million, which is about almost a $600,000 increase. Then also one of the things, after examining just things within our own funds, we have a transfer that comes from our EMS fund, which should be equal to 2 mills. And it was not equal to 2 mills. So we did increase that from $1.9 million to $2.4 million. So that was an increase of 40%. And there was a $933,000 increase. So one of the things with the EMS fund, EMS is funded, the EMS division within the fire department is like a $21 million budget. The EMS fund funds $14 million of that. The rest of it is mostly funded from the city general fund. And so when the tax to start the special EMS fund was first put in place, one of the things that was put in place was a commitment to the citizens to have a 2 mil reduction to the city general fund. And that comes in the form of a transfer back to the city general fund. So we hadn't been doing a full 2 mills, so we increased that to a full 2 mills. So that's what's going on there. So the next fund we're going to talk about what the differences are, it's the county general fund. So when we first opened up the budget season and start discussing the budget, the county general fund, we had a structural imbalance where we expecting only $226,000 to be structurally imbalanced. But as we got into the budget and digging into the revenues, we found that some of our revenues were forecasted too high. And it was based on how revenues have been coming in 2023 when we were looking at the revenues and how they were built in. Some of those revenues, they were built last summer. So looking into them, we found out that some of those revenue targets weren't meeting what we quite expected. So we ended up having to go in and reduce some of our revenue targets. And there were really just three revenues that really impacted the county general fund. So we see on August 10th, when we proposed the budget, we went from $84 million that we were forecasting to 81 or almost $82 million, which is about a $2.5 million drop in revenues. So the main story there is motor vehicle projections were lowered 14%. And Debbie, she may want to touch on some of that. I know she has some information on that.
I'll just say, I think our projections were higher based on what had been coming in over the last several years. If you recall, when in 2020, when we had COVID, registrations were delayed. And so we had, I believe we were seeing over the next year after that, we started seeing more registrations. However, in looking at where we have been last year and this year, according to the treasurer, the new vehicle registrations appear to be down, and we're seeing more renewals now versus new vehicle purchases. So we went ahead and lowered our estimates on those. Let me talk about interest. Maybe I'll go ahead and just talk about the interest income. Our projections there, we also lowered those. Our interest rates have been going up, and we're getting more interest income than we've seen in a long time. But our projections, I think, based on our original 2023 estimate, were probably a little bit higher than what we're seeing coming in. So we did reduce those numbers for 2023 and 2024 to reflect the investments that we know that are maturing this year and next year.
Also, our deed recordings are down. So the amount of recordings that the Register of Deeds office has had, were originally comparing January to August of 2022 to 2023. Right now, we're at $1.2 million in 2020, or $1.2 million, or I'm sorry, 1.2 million people recording deeds, and that's down. That's down compared to last year. It ends up being like 2.2 million. And then some of the things driving that is the high interest rates. People aren't refinancing at the rate they were. People aren't buying homes at the rate they were. So that ended up dropping what we were estimating. So what we're going to look at now is the 2024 proposed budget for the city general fund, and look at some of the different scenarios that was requested from last week. So the first scenario that we have is looking at a revenue neutral budget for the city general fund. And that would equate to 2.8 mils. Right now, that would equal to about $5.7 million. So we can see when we proposed the budget last week, we would have almost a 25% fund balance. And when we initially came forward in May, in 2026, this fund was going to be in the red, where it was going to be out of cash. So one of the things that we have done is, into the foreseeable 5-year future, we have pushed out where that is not going to be an issue anymore. So we can see out in 2028, we still do have a fund balance, but our fund balance is under the fund balance limit that Debbie Johnson covered a little earlier, where we should be at like 17%. We have dropped under the 17% out in 2028. So that's something that we definitely need to keep our eyes on. But as we move into revenue neutral, and that is the bottom financial, we can see in 2024, we're taking $5.7 million out of revenue for city general fund. It does cause us to have a structurally imbalanced budget of about $6 million compared to what we propose of $732,000. And our fund balance does still stay at 21% or almost 22%. But one of the things that happens out into the foreseeable future is when we get over into 2026, our fund balance does drop to about 11%. And then that next year in 2027, we are like definitely structurally imbalanced, but our cash basis fund balance ends up being almost $4 million in the hole. So we wouldn't be able to approve a budget that year. And then it gets worse going into 2028, where it jumps up to about $15 million. And we can see definitely fund balance is in the negative. And then in 2027, fund balance drops to almost 6%.
Mr. Lindsay, you got a question from Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you. I just need to spend more time with this slide, but the part of it that's bothering me the most is on July 13th, when we held our hearing to exceed revenue neutral, the mill levy decrease to be revenue neutral was 5.034 mills just for the city side, which is what we're talking about here.
So, and then what you're looking at includes like the county bond and interest fund also?
Okay, and
We're looking
here
at
you're
is-
just talking about the general fund.
Yes,
Is that the difference?
yes.
Okay, that's helpful. I've been struggling with these numbers and this slide based on the 2.8 mils. So the concept that I'm hearing you say is that we could be revenue neutral just in the general fund, but it still creates this imbalance down the road.
Yes, it definitely would create an imbalance down the road.
Okay.
And it also does cause us to have a structurally imbalanced budget of about $6 million for this 2024 budget also.
Commissioner.
But we're looking in isolation at one fund here. And so in isolation, one fund looks like this, but we've got to stack the rest of the funds on it. And these deficits are additive. If we choose to stack reductions, we get stacked deficits, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have to all keep in mind that this is a sliver of the entire funding package, and that no change that we make here happens in isolation all by its lonesome unless we direct it to happen in isolation. So we have to always remember that whatever we're looking at here, if we add anything from an upcoming slide, it adds. And so it's going to change depending on what we pick and then how we choose to structure and blend them, right?
That is correct.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Stites has a question.
Stites District 7. I have just a quick question about if we go back to the slide where it was talk about the general fund and our fund balance resolution 35-18. And it says that the general fund, we try to be at 17%, and that's by resolution, right? Adopted in 2018. And then the economic uncertainty is 8%, right? Which gets us to that 25% number. Was that economic uncertainty 8% voted also by resolution?
Yes, that was in the policy, but the entire policy was approved. by resolution.
Okay, so why would we not, and I'm just asking, why would we have not just said the operating reserve be at 25%? Why have two line items, 117 and 18?
I'm thinking the reason we probably split it out like that was to give us some flexibility. Because right now we look at our minimum to be the 17%, but based on, GFOA guidelines, best practices, they recommend that we really should be, the minimum should be 25. But I think we put the economic uncertainty in there to kind of give us some flexibility. So even if we went below 25, if we got to 20 or 21, yes, we're below the total reserve, but we're not below our minimum operating reserve of 2 months.
Thank you. Commissioner Burrows has a question.
Thank you, Debbie. If I remember correctly, our former CFO wanted 3 months reserves at 25% target. And we felt that that reserve was a little too steep at the time when we reviewed it. And we compromised to come to having the 1 month emergency fund. That's the set aside to address issues that came up just as that without having to dip into our reserves per se. That's how we came up with the two different numbers, if I remember correctly. I know we put it into policy at 17 and 8, but I think the commission when it came to compromising was to do it that way versus throwing it all in one fund at 25%.
Right. And trying to get up to that 25% right away. I think the idea was to build and try to get to that 25%. Because we were not, in 2018, we were not at the 25%.
Thank you. I have a question. So my understanding on revenue neutral is that to make up that deficit best we can with your projections that's all coming out of the reserves, correct?
Yeah, it would definitely come from our fund balance.
Right. Have we done any projections?
$1 million.
Right. Have we done any projections what it would look like if we were to streamline this government, if we were to find cost-cutting measures, what that would look like, if we were to cut back, if we were to look at some of our CMIP projects, if we were to look at ways we can tighten our belt to give a clear picture of, I know everything you say, we'll take it out of reserves, but have we deep dived and really looked at where can we find cost savings throughout the various departments for operating budgets? Because I know when I was on the police department, there were several times under Administrator Dennis Hayes. And I was given direction through my chief, major cut 5, if not 10% off your budget. I had to go through line item by line item, that printer I wanted, that whatever reams of paper I may have wanted, I had to push that back and really prioritize on what do I do, being in charge of where I was at West Patrol to be able to provide the services that this community has come to expect. When you talk about essential services, which is responding for calls in the best and efficient way, and making sure that my officers could do that safely and make sure they all have the equipment that they need without a lot of the wants that I may have wanted, our needs, including building upgrades that I may have wanted, some things that I may have wanted to beautify. Those were things, even at times we cut back on vehicles. We had to go 2, 3, 4 years without new vehicles. I mean, and back then we weren't as in a dire of a strait, from my knowledge. Now I wasn't on this side in this building that we're seeing now, because I've never heard of us being in the red. So when you talk about everything to make up these deficits just coming out of reserves, I haven't really heard a lot of talk about what we can do to find cost savings and streamline, innovate, better align departments, get rid of vacant positions that are funded, looking at various ways to look at redundancies, how we combine departments, things of that nature in a way to where, okay, now this commission can look and say, we've identified best we can by really gauging and engaging, I should say, our department heads, like I was engaged, and saying, okay, staff, help this commission find the cuts so we can remain solvent. And we even went further. There were times when we were cut off. We could not spend any more money past, I think 1 year was October or November unless it was something really critical and I had to get approval and it had to go all the way up to the chain of command over to this building to get the administrator's approval. So there were things like that that were done and we weren't as in dire straits as we are now. I just don't hear a lot of talk about what are the options for creating smaller government that's more efficient, that's streamlined, that innovates, that cuts out redundancy, looks for waste, fraud, and maybe abuse. And because of where we're at financially, yeah, maybe we want a lot of different things. But to avoid the red, we focus on what are the essential services and what are the needs to be able to fund those essential services, to provide the types of services that is acceptable or will be acceptable to our residents. Because I'm going to keep saying it. People are really struggling and struggling bad. And I hear it at every community meeting that I go to. You all have got to quit raising taxes. There has to be a pressure point put on. And when I say to the public, well, you know, we're working, and they're telling me, well, I'm doing bad and I'm tightening my belt, but there's nothing more for me to tighten. There's no more juice I can squeeze out of my pocketbook. And they're telling me, you're taxing me out of my house, taxing me into poverty, are taxing me out of this county. And people that are saying, you know, I'd love to come do business here a bit, but your taxes are too high. And we ain't even talking about BPU. And so just those types of questions that I'm being asked as mayor, and I just don't hear a lot about what are the options other than just take it out of reserves.
I will say, later in the presentation, we haven't done probably the deep dive, I think maybe what you're looking at, but we have the budget office has gone through and later in the presentation, we do have some items that we've looked at for possible options for if we choose to do a revenue reduction, some expenses I think that we've been asked to look at.
I'd just like to add, I think throughout the whole budget process, we said a few things. First of all, this is a shortened budget process. We lost 2.5 months of the budget process because I got appointed at the end of March. So we lost 2.5 months to do a deep dive like you were talking about. But also we committed through the process of this deep dive that I think the mayor is articulating is going to happen starting after this budget starts for the next budget. And during the process, if we find in the deep dive, we can make changes immediately, we'll make changes immediately. But there should be a whole different look of a budget next year because of that deep dive commitment. So because of the loss of 2.5 months, we did do the funded vacancies, particularly the long-term positions that were in people's budgets that hadn't been filled for 2, 3, 4 years. They got eliminated. That was one of the easier cuts. I think we even went to 2 years. And so that made a dent. We did receive a few ideas, some good ideas from departments. And when we weighed them, if they were feasible, we did those. But it's not to the magnitude that I think, Mayor, you're looking for. I think you're going to see that in the 25 budget process.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things that we also need to consider is our cost of goods sold is increasing. You talk about asphalt, you talk about concrete, the things that our public works department has brought to us to say how far behind we are and how much ground we need to make up. It seems to be untenable at this particular rate. So while I do agree that we need to try to see how we can tighten up our belts, but everything else is increasing. And so, you know, I think it's reasonable to expect for our budget to have to reflect that. Otherwise, I think will be a real disservice to our constituency. And so that's just a counterbalance. And I appreciate what David said as well about doing the deep dive. There are some things that are really out of our control. I think we just want to have to realistic about what that is. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator.
I guess I just also want to add, Commissioner, you bring up a good point, and maybe it's not appreciated by our public, but just as homes are affected by inflation, so are we. And when you use the word pavement, usually the public works inflation rate is about 10 to 15% annually. That's where the CPI might be around 5 to 6%. It's because of the fluctuation of things like the oil market, which we don't appreciate. And you don't think that it affects the cost of government, but it does. And therefore, what we're also seeing, I think some of the points that you heard from Public Works over the few months that I've been here, is that, because inflation is real, supply chain increases the price because of scarcity of materials, our buying power shrinks. And therefore, our ability to deliver what we'd like to deliver, we can't because of the cost of doing business. And so that's the beyond your control comment, Commissioner, I think. And so we need to say it overtly so the public hears it and hopefully understands it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Lindsay.
Our next scenario is looking at the city general fund at a 2 mil reduction. So on top, we have what we proposed for the 2024 proposed budget, and we can see in 2024, we almost have a 25% fund balance. As we get to the 2 mil reduction scenario that's at the bottom in 2024's budget, it does take out a 3.28 million or $3.2 million from revenues for that 2 mil reduction. And the mill or our fund balance does stay at almost 23%. But as we get out into 2026, we can see that we fall below our 17% fund balance. Also, we can see that each year we still are structurally imbalanced. So in 2024, we're at $4 million structurally imbalanced. And then in 2025, we end up being $4.6 million structurally imbalanced out into 2028, where we're about $8.2 million structurally imbalanced. If you compare that to what we proposed on last week, we still are structurally imbalanced, but we're not as much in the hole as compared to what we did last week. So last week we proposed where we won't be in the hole out until past 2028, but cutting the 2 mills, we end up being in the hole like in 2028. So those are some things to consider with cutting 2 mills for the city general fund. Current slide, what we're doing reviewing here is we're looking at the additional revenue that's coming in from BPU's pilot or BPU's rate increase and how that would impact our pilot. So what we figure is that we would have like $750,000 of additional revenue come in. Again, the top piece of the financials are looking at what we proposed last week, and the bottom half is looking at what we're doing is adding additional pilot relief to the expense side. So we're taking that $750,000 in revenue that we receive, we're leaving it there, but we're setting aside $750,000 each year for pilot relief. And what we can see the impact there in 2024 is about 24% fund balance we still have as compared to what we proposed last week. So just looking at the fund balance and everything pretty much stays the same all 5 years that we have a view of. We do out in 2028 do get under the 17% fund balance, but we also do that in what we proposed last week also. So that is a view of having an additional $750,000 in the budget for pilot relief.
Thank you. Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Johnson also had his hand up. Go ahead.
Commissioner Johnson, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. Trying to make sure I understand this. When I look at all of these, you see the ACFR ending fund balance. And then we have underneath there, the reserve percentage of expenditure. And then we have another number that says the fund balance 17% target. The reserve percentage of expenditure, are we comparing that with the 25% that we had talked about, the Commissioner Stites pulled out? Is that the number that we're reflecting? In other words, under this current page, I think, yeah. So where we see for the 2024 forecast, it has the reserve percentage of expenditure of 24.37. Is that to be measured against the 25% goal? In other words, does it have the relief portion or the, what's the name of the 8%?
The additional month.
Yeah, the economic uncertainty. Is that built into this number that we're looking at?
So the fund balance is based on the ACFR fund balance, and it's how much of that ACFR fund balance compares to the total expense. So we do end up getting close to the 25% in the 2024 forecast. I don't know if that's your question.
Okay. I think I'm getting it. So in that case of the 2024 forecast, 41,581,750. That represents the 24.37%, correct?
Yes. And that is the one we're figuring out. So there are two cash balance or ending fund balances here. One is the cash ending fund balance, which is what we have to have a fund balance there to approve a budget. Then there's the ACFR ending fund balance.
Yeah.
And that's the one we figured that.
Then you take the 17% and that's how you get down to 29 million, that particular page, under the 2024 forecast.
I think the 17% is just showing if we were to drop just the reserve percentage to 17%, that would be the fund balance we'd need to have. Yes.
And I've been kind of just contemplating this since the last time we looked at it. We're really talking about operating with a imbalanced fund or imbalanced budget for the foreseeable future. Correct. Not getting any better, no matter any of these scenarios, it gets worse as we go along. It's my own observation. Am I missing that, or is somebody else seeing that, or no?
No, that's correct. Yeah. The net change between revenues and expenses is in the red all the way throughout to 2028. Even though we are within our fund balance, we are still spending more than we're bringing in.
And to add to that, I think in a perfect world, we would all love to be able to have our expenses be less than the revenue generated. I think one of the things that alarms me, and I've talked with our budget team a few times, is whatever scenario you've seen on the screen today, we are out of balance. We are thankful that we have enough reserve money to balance our budget to meet what we are considering meeting the needs of our public in our general fund services. What this long range approach that we've been keeping in front of you is that it doesn't go away. And we are going to have to do the deep dives that the mayor has suggested today, because eventually that red number needs to go away. It needs to turn into a black number. And in a couple of the scenarios that we've already looked at, you saw the red numbers go into other cells. And that's what's scary. And I know we're making some assumptions today that influence the financial picture of the future, but every organization does that. If you don't change and you're assuming that the outside world and everything in it is controlled, that's the scenarios that are outputs of this model. Now, what's not in there is what Commissioner Johnson referred to. There might be things beyond our control that change that. Like just last week, I'm watching the news and they're talking about another recession in 2024 after a leveling area. Now, that's just their talk, but it makes us in the financial world think about, what if that's real? What's that do to our budget? Does that make our red number higher? That adds the urgency for us to really do deep dives and tighten the belts and look for efficiencies and savings. So if there are those uncontrollable things, the impact isn't as hard because we took actions today. Our prayer is that it gets better. And then we get more revenue and we don't see price increases to stretch us. So that's the alarming part. Every year we have relied on reserves. And I don't want us to get into the habit that it's fine to go over. We'll always have the reserves. This is telling us you don't always have don't count on it if you're doing the same thing today as you're going to do for tomorrow. So it's the red flag that forces us to act now to deal with. Now, on top of that, we're presenting these scenarios because you're hearing from the public that they want relief. What we're presenting to you is, one, a budget that we feel meets the service needs to our public. But the public is saying, I need additional relief. And that's taking revenue out of our stream and has an impact for us to provide certain levels of service, or any service at all for certain things, just to make the balanced budget requirement. And so it's not lost what some of you have voiced. You're hearing from the public. We hear it too, because we're hearing it from you. We hear it when we're mingling with the constituents. And yet we're also saying, well, we want to have certain levels of service. And it's a heck of a balancing act. And I think next week is probably the most impactful week, our budget session, that maybe this council has ever had to face. It's this balancing. If you choose to want to do something else, you actually have to make choices on what services to provide, levels of service to provide, programs to provide. And, you know, it's a balancing act. So if we may get through, unless Commissioner Burrows has a burning question, we can get going.
If I could just ask one more thing. So to get back to the additive comment that I made, or question that I had earlier. So if you go back to the slide where it talks about 2 mil reduction, and if we look at 2024 forecast, cash basis ending fund balance at 27,484. I'm sorry, I go down to 24,204. So down there, right in the middle at the bottom. So that assumes a 2 mil reduction against our projections, and that would be the cash basis ending fund balance for 2024. $24,204,011. But now go to the BPU 750, the pilot 750 right there. Now that shows at the end of 2024, a cash basis ending fund balance of 26,734. But that's happening in isolation. It's not coupled with the 2 mil from the previous slide. So if we chose to do 2 mils and the 750, we're looking at numbers you haven't even considered here yet that are going to be worse than anything you've considered here yet. So I want us to make sure that we always keep in mind what fund we're talking about up at top, because some of these are additive. and they cannot be considered in isolation from each other. So there will be a cumulative effect if we choose to stack some of these approaches, like a 2 mil city plus the 750 BPU. They're going to start stacking on each other, and it's going to make the picture get, it's not a word, but worser, faster.
And Commissioner McCurran, towards the end of our session tonight, we will be able to look at those stacked on top of each other.
Commissioner Burrows had a question.
Thank you. Really not a question. Reggie, I'm looking at these numbers and these are static numbers across the board. You take static cut today and it runs through the numbers that you have projections out there. But what it doesn't, these numbers don't reflect is the hiccups that can occur due to electric and I'm talking about the BPU pilot, the increase in rates that the BPU chooses to do, our increase in valuation, which will again increase revenue to the local unit of government's general fund, efficiencies that we find throughout the budget, economic development that has come online and is paying more in taxes, and the interest growth that we could experience even in a down recession. Interest rates usually stay static or at least climb a little more than what we're even seeing now. We're seeing a slow return to higher interest rate. So none of that is in here. In addition to what Commissioner McKiernan presented, his static numbers present on top of everything else. I just want to state that those things are out there too that could put this budget in a little more manageable condition that reflects the mayor's concern and some of the other commissioners' concerns about finding these deep dive through the budget next year. Would that be a correct statement?
So we do have growth rates in here in our budget, like revenues by certain revenue categories.
Okay, well, I guess maybe what I would need to know is where you're reflecting that growth. I mean, if you're going just a straight 5% across the board, we went with a very conservative number. I'll use sales tax as an example. I believe a couple of years ago, we took a very conservative sales tax initiative and drove it through the budget at 5%. And it came in, if I believe, at 8 or 11% higher. So that was an increase to our budget. The evaluations that we just went through were higher than I think we expected. So we see an additional increase in revenue in just a short 9-month cycle. So I don't want to paint the ugliest picture by saying the stacking is going to affect us this bad, because there's other things that can affect us in a positive way. And that's what we have to collectively work through and get our guidance from staff on those numbers as they come forward.
Yep, that's correct. If if we're projecting a 3 to 5% increase in sales tax, we could see, we're just kind of looking at what the trend is up to now for going forward. But yeah, if we were to see an increase of say 8 or 9% in sales tax, that would be an additional revenue that would come in that we probably wouldn't have reflected if we're not seeing that kind of a trend of an increase right now.
And I understand taking a static number and putting it through by a mean or a median. I understand that process, but I also don't want to lose sight. I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that we will have additional revenues come in that we don't realize that will be coming in. It could be that whatever it may be, somebody just may write us a fat check that wins the lottery. Yeah.
But also, Commissioner Burrows, one of the things that we've seen with the county general fund was, we did do estimates on it, but we did have to end up cutting about $2.5 million out of that budget. So doing static, you don't always get the increase that you expect either. And you also sometimes may get an increase.
And so I completely appreciate where Commissioner Burrows is coming from, but I do know, and maybe it would be good that if you could send us just a reminder. I know that you have numbers that you model into your projections. So you've made these projections on the basis of some assumptions. Now, but I also want to point out in my usual Eeyore way that we could get more sales tax than we project, but we could get less. And so one of the things that I've appreciated about your approach has been that you take a conservative estimate and use that as your growth multiplier. And you're trying to hedge more revenue than we expect against less revenue than we expect. So I appreciate that you've taken a generally conservative approach to this, but I completely appreciate what Commissioner Burrows has said is that we need to always stay on top of this because things could change on a half year by half year or even annual basis. And we just need to be nimble and go with that. So thank you very much.
I just want to add, these points that the commissioners made are very valid, basically because when you looked at one of the things that Reggie mentioned on the county side, because people aren't buying new cars, they're keeping the older cars, therefore the amount of tax revenue we get is lower because it's a depreciated asset. That action of people not replacing their cars on what we got used to is subject to the interest rate that is being charged to the consumer by the auto dealers. And so if they're high, if they're at 6 and 7% these days, they'll wait. My car's still running. I'll do another maintenance check a year. That's about $400 as opposed to a large interest increase on a car payment. So, that happens. I think we hope that the interest rates go down, and we're all listening to Reserve Chairman Powell when he talks, because what's he saying? And I think he has said there's another rate increase by year end. So we anticipate that, and that's probably going to have an impact on consumer behavior. On the other side of the coin, we're looking at something very nice in 2026 with World Cup. We anticipate a throng of foreign visitors entering Wyandotte County, spending time here, being in hotels, spending money in food establishments. I anticipate seeing a larger amount of sales tax revenue generated at that time. Unfortunately, it's hard for us to calculate that today. So that's going to be a one-time windfall because of the flux of people coming to see their teams play in the Kansas City region. So Commissioner Burrows said, yes, there are unanticipated good results. Commissioner Kernan balances that out by saying, well, we might have some bad times. And that's the funny thing about budgeting. It probably about 20 years ago, the municipal world woke up and said, you can't just rely on an annual look at your budget. You have to look at the trends, at the financial information, whether it's coming out of Wall Street Journal, whether it's coming out of Washington economists, and start thinking about the impact on your situation today. You can't wait till I'm going to start a budget process, then I'll look. Because there may be times during the current budget year, we got to come and say, and I've done this, I need to freeze spending because of A, B, C, D. And so that's why we have to stay attuned to it on a day-to-day basis and listen and think, this is what I heard. Does that have an impact on our revenue streams? Or our expenses? Do we lose more buying power due to inflation or other things like that? So the municipal budgeting world learned about 20 years ago that you have to more frequently look and think about the impacts of what you're hearing today to the existing budget and possible impact on future budgets. So it's a dynamic process. I think that's what I've heard all these commissioners say. And we have to stay on top of it. And I think that's one of the reasons why our unified government specifically has an Office of Budget. And it's a service to us and for our citizens, so we can stay on top of that. And then Debbie's shop pretty much handles a lot of the day-to-day stuff. get our bills paid, make sure the bonds are handled well and all that. So they work in tandem, but they each have separate responsibilities. And I think that helps us become a better government for our citizens.
Thank you, Mayor. Comment, just a comment that I think is interesting to what you've heard Commissioner Burrows and Commissioner McKiernan say and the administrator. So last night, our Visit KCK Convention Bureau hosted a reception for Mr. Johnston to welcome him, and Commissioner Burrows attended, the mayor attended, I attended. And Alan Carr, the director, told us, I was fascinated by this, that in July or June, whenever she came here, we, KCK, experienced the highest transient guest tax ever in our history because of Taylor Swift. These are the variables. That one happened to be a really positive story. So we need to have her back, have her come back. But I just thought that was just fascinating. That is the impact that we talk about when we talk about these, that had a tangible local impact for our community. And I'm fascinated by that. And I thought that was a particularly good story to hear. I just have a quick question because I know you have a lot more to walk us through. This slide depicting $750K for the pilot relief. I want to know what you mean. Do you mean the pilot relief for the targeted population that the committee brought forward, or is this some other relief scenario?
What the committee brought forward.
Thank you.
That was counter the recant that Commissioner Johnson made. So he recanted, so he brought it back. So you can thank him. The other thing, Commissioner Bynum talked about the Taylor Swift. That was for two hotel days. Is that we had over $400,000 of hotel transient income each night, all because of a concert in another city across the river. And that's why we have to really reach out and be part of regional action, because we do benefit. And those other cities, Johnson County communities, the Casey Mo communities, all benefit when the races are here, when the soccer team plays. That's why we cannot afford to be a parochial island within the KC metro region. And it's interesting to be a player in that, in a few of the arenas that because of the virtue of my office, that I get to play in. And I think they're building respect for Wyandotte County because we're playing in the sandbox now, and at the direction of the mayor and the commission and the expectations. So we do see the fruits of the labor, fruits of reaching across the aisle and being part of a bigger picture, because what happens at a concert at whatever arena happens in KC Mo, people are staying here and spending their money here.
So the next couple slides that we're going to talk about are the county general fund, presenting the same information that we presented for the city. So this first slide is a comparison of our proposed 2024 proposed budget and what the county general fund would look like going revenue neutral. So in our proposed budget for 2024, you will see that we are at 16.92% fund balance, which is just above our minimum 2-month reserve. But then as you can see, if you go down to the revenue neutral, and I did want to note there, I think we have maybe a miscalculation here on the revenue neutral graph. Because I'm looking at the 2023 amended and our proposed is that ends at 11.5, and in the revenue neutral one, it ends at 7.6. So we do have an error there. But I did go back and I was just kind of trying to add up while we were here. That it looks like it doesn't drop it drops us to about 3.3 million in 2024 going revenue neutral. And then we go into the negative 3.1 million into the 2025 forecast. So we might have to get a new slide there for that. But that's kind of where we go. We drop down to 3.3 million in 2024 and then go negative in 2025 going revenue neutral on the revenue side. And that would be going revenue neutral would be 3.78 mils on the county general fund side. The next slide is a 2 mil reduction. And I'm seeing the same issue on the 2 mil reduction slide that we've got it looks like we have a different number for the 2023. So on that one, in the proposed, we are at 11.2 million for 2024 forecast. And then on the 2 mil reduction, it would take us down to about 5.8 million. And then on that two in 2026, the fund would go negative with that 2 mil reduction. So we'll correct those slides and get some new slides sent out to everyone. So the next couple slides that the rest of the slides that we're going to talk about are some of the options for reducing expenditures. If the commission decides, yes, you would like to reduce revenue, we put forth some options for reducing the expenses to keep our fund balance at the same as what we had proposed. So this first one, and I believe this was a request from Commissioner Burrows to look at all the payments to outside agencies. And we're just putting these up here to show that what we have currently built into the budget. So these are all the outside agencies. We've listed them by whether their contribution is from the city or the county or both. So as you can see, the county fair gets 129,000. And I will note that 100,000 of that goes to the fair. And the remainder is built in for a reimbursement of supplies. And I believe we are required by statute to do that reimbursement. So that portion payment to the fair would still need to be built into the budget because we are required to reimburse them for their supplies. But the direct payment that we give to the fair is about 100,000.
Debbie, you said by statute, is it by statute or by ordinance?
Believe it's a statute.
Statute? Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
I think that the county's required to reimburse them for the expenses on the fair.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Commissioner Kane has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. That was put in long before some of us are alive. You know, and that ain't no joke. You know, so yeah, it is, especially as old as you are. But I think we should continue to do that because it's something that actually works. The kids like it and stuff like that. But like I said, this is long before we were born.
Right. I think a lot of these payments have been in place for quite a number of years. The request was to show what those payments were. So Extension Council, 595,000, the Law Library, Mental Health, Wyandotte County Sports Association. Let's see, I think the one I'm going to skip down to is the Neighborhood Business Revitalization. There are 8 neighborhood groups that get a total of $27,500. And that's what that total 220,000 makes up, the 8 groups there. So on the city side, we're giving 565,000 in payments to outside agencies. And on the county side, it's just under 1.1 million.
Commissioner Stites has a question.
Commissioner Stites, District 7. So I have a question about, so under the Wyandotte EDC, So they're receiving money out of the county side. We're giving money out of the county side and the city side. And they also are collecting money from each city, Bonner Springs and Edwardsville. So if they're receiving money out of the county side, why wouldn't that cover the other two cities that are in the county? I mean, why would, they're getting money out of the county, we're paying that, and then they're also getting paid by Bonner Springs and Edwardsville. I mean, that's kind of seems like they're double dipping there.
Yeah, and Kansas City, Kansas. So if you, what you could do is just pay suggesting pay the entire amount out of the county general fund to cover all three cities.
I'm saying, why would Bonner Springs and Edwardsville be paying into Wyandotte EDC if they're already paying into it out of the county side?
Well, that would be the same thing that KCK is doing, right?
Why? I mean, why is it not just paid out of one county, right? Out of the county?
Right. I don't know the answer to that. We could certainly look into what the agreement is for that.
A lot of times in the economic development game, it's usually the responsibility of the city government to pay for things. And what's unique here is it seems to be a partnership. And because you split the cost here, and we have three separate cities. So KCK is paying a share, Edwardsville and Bonner Springs are paying a share, and the county is partnering with those three cities to pay. Now, also, that doesn't cover the cost of the EDC, what they're getting. They also have members who pay for the rest of their budget. But this is you don't lose the fact that KCK's budget is paying 98,000. So there should be an expectation that the other two towns pay as well.
Okay, well, I would say to that then is just take the county out of it then. Have just the three cities pay.
Well, you could do that. It's just decisions are made over time that this is kind of like a partnership.
Well, I mean, I know, but we're talking about ways to trim our budget. I mean, there's $196,000 right there that comes out of our budget.
Well, but we would have to split that.
Why? I mean, if we're trimming the fat, here's a good place to trim it.
Commissioner Markland.
On that point, I would just comment, this is probably, particularly considering we basically have no economic development department right now. This is probably the one outside agency that is giving us the most return for our money. Because they're basically doing the job of our department that we don't have right now. Well, they're doing the work for the whole county though. That's why everybody's paying in. I would also just mention, while I have the microphone, I do believe the top 3 items on this list are all required by state statute. Nobody would pay for a law library if they didn't have to, folks. Every county has one and it's not by choice.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to say on the Wyandotte Economic Development Council topic, I do concur with Commissioner Merkley. I would say, I'm just using my memory, which might be dangerous, but Wyandotte Development, Inc. was the precursor to Wyandotte EDC, as we call it today. And it was probably developed more than 20 years ago with the notion in mind that the county and the 3 cities would all pay in to the functions of what they do. My statement to tonight, last week, next week, and the entire budget cycle is that economic development is the way that we work our way to not being in a structurally imbalanced budget. So this would not be a place where I would choose first.
Commissioner Burrows and then you.
Reggie, the downtown shareholders, That 177.5, is that their mill levy?
No, it's not. It's a contribution that the unified government pays to them. We don't pay property taxes to pay into the mill they collect. So that's what that is for.
Okay, so
It's
that's
kinda
in
like a payment in
addition
lieu
to,
of taxes for us.
so that's in addition to what they levy upon themselves with their mill.
Yes.
And the next question I have, the NBR, the 220, is that what we pay each neighborhood group? Is that the 8 neighborhood groups total?
Yes.
Thank you. That, I just wanted to ensure that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. When I would encourage all the commissioners to go to the Wyandotte meeting once a month to see the value that they have providing for us. And it's amazing sometimes the stuff you find there. You know, they have a presentation, they talk about the 3 or 4 items, and then there's 2 pages of long range stuff that they're working on. So I think it's very valuable and I wouldn't want to jack with that fund on either side. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Maybe someone can answer this for me. I know the downtown shareholders gets the SMID, you know, what I like to call it, which is a board. And then it looks like, I guess what you're telling me, we contribute to this MBR as well. And I know there's a lot of history to this. I'm trying to figure out what makes them unique from all the other MBRs, the other 7, to where they get a SMID and a hefty contribution from the unified government. Now, I can tell you one thing, and I'm not going to say I'm the Scrooge, but I know that the mayor's Christmas tree lighting money, it traditionally has come out of that. Even this year, I mean, I'd be willing to say, hey, you know, you can put a Christmas tree in the lobby of City Hall, but that big blowout event, considering our financials, I mean, I would be the mayor to say, you know, we've got to make some hard choices. That's one thing that I could say maybe for the next few years until we can get back on track. Maybe we don't have a big mayor's Christmas tree lighting because that's a huge cost as well. I don't know if you factored, well, let me stay with this first. A little history, I guess, of why that is an obligation for the unified government for the downtown showholders. And I know they do trash cleanup. I know there's security, but there's been some questions as to the effectiveness from people that I've talked to on the SMID board as well. When you look at the trash, when you look at the vagrants, when you get complaints from some of the downtown folks down there that are saying, that are starting to question, are we getting a good return on our dollar for what we're seeing with the influx of vagrants, homeless, and a lot of folks. I'm hearing defecation, urination, fights, mental illness from folks down here. And when you're talking about, these aren't police officers, these are private unarmed security guards that really do what I would do, is I'd pick up the phone and call 911 if I saw something nefarious or illegal going on. So I don't know, maybe legal can speak to this. I don't know what is that Velcro that makes the downtown shareholders so unique and different than anyone else? And is that something this commission can consider as a viable option, that maybe we re-examine whatever it is with both the SMID and the downtown shareholders to make it more equitable to the other MBRs?
This is Winnie Green with legal, and unfortunately, this legal person cannot answer that question.
I would say I can answer. I believe that the reason we give them a contribution is we are within the downtown shareholder district, but because we are exempt, we do not pay into we do not pay taxes to them along with all the other businesses within the group. And so I think the decision was made to contribute money to them because in lieu of the fact that we do not pay taxes into that district.
I get it, but then I get back to what's the return on our investment, and is that a necessity for our residents to pay that tax just to say we're a member of a downtown group? And that's a huge investment on top of a commission-approved taxing entity, the SMID. And then I don't know what that reporting looks like back to us. And I don't mean this in a negative way towards the downtown shareholders, but I just look at equity when you talk about the other MBRs that have needs as well. And really, if you look at the unified government in Wyandotte County, any of those MBRs can say, well, the unified government covers the entire county and we are a member of the entire county. So you could say, okay, well, we're downtown, this physical building, but technically the unified government hits every corner of Wyandotte County. So what makes this entity so unique from all the other MBRs, when you talk to them and they have the same exact needs and they don't have a SMID and they don't get that level of amount of money of invested as well. And so when you talk about cutting costs and looking at ways we can, and Commissioner Stites is right, what's the return on our investment and what's the value? When I walk out, and Commissioner Burrows came to me and talked about some of the issues he had with just a lot of the homeless and the vagrants and the crime and the trash and just the problems we're seeing in our downtown. And I'm not saying that the downtown shareholders isn't trying to address those issues, but obviously from what we're seeing, even that investment that we're making may not be enough to handle the issues that are down there. And so, Commissioner Bonner.
Thank you, Mayor. The reason why downtown shareholders receives this dollar amount and none of the other NBRs do is because they did the work to enact the state legislation that then allowed for the enactment of the special municipal improvement district. Business West, for example, a 35 to 40-year-old organization spent, to my knowledge, a decade trying to do the same thing for the State Avenue corridor unsuccessfully. Because what's required is that you get your property owners to agree to tax themselves more for extra services. And a couple things could happen here and have happened in the past. The downtown shareholders, I believe, would be very pleased at the $177,000 mark. But when the economic downturn occurred in 08, 09, I'm certain that dollar got cut. You can confirm for me. You were here, I was not. But I was involved on the downtown shareholders board side of that experience. And then we had to work our way back to this figure. And this figure is the, again, the result of the unified government owning so much of the property within the boundaries of this municipal improvement district. So I can assure you that if we were going to consider some change in any of this, which is fine to look at everything, because I think that's what we're doing, I would want to at least give them the opportunity to come bring us the data. I am certain they measure it, and I get an email fairly regularly from the security company that has the contract. So, I think there's a lot more to say there before this would be some unilateral decision. And to me, it would start with letting them show us the data. And I'll yield. Thanks, Mayor.
Commissioner Johnson and then Commissioner Davis right after.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to say that Debbie, you all have more opportunities for us to cut here as well, don't you, Mr. Lindsay? So let's hear the rest of your recommendations for us to cut.
Very quickly, and yes, I've been kind of withholding, you all are welcome, from speaking, because I do want to hear the rest of this, but that board has autonomy. We make appointments, right? We have appointees that we can discuss, particularly with SMID. And so, and I know there's some folks that are also working with downtown shareholders. So I think it would be good for us to really kind of hear from them what the plan is before we make a decision for them. I would hate to make a decision on their behalf without actually speaking to them. So thank you. But yes, please proceed.
Thank you. And just real quickly, and I agree with both Commissioner Bynum and Davis that this wasn't to advocate to get it done, but to let's look at that and see, okay, how are they spending their money? And is this something that this commission feels that is a vital necessity when you talk about that level of investment, both SMID-wise and direct payments of that $177,000. So thank you, Mr. Lindsay.
So the next slide is just some additional community programs that we've kind of listed out that are currently in the budget. These two are for Neighborhood Resource Center. We're looking at demolition funding of about 300,000. We've also got some livable neighborhood grant funding, and I'm going to let Reggie talk about that.
So the grant funding is for a home repair that Livable Neighborhood does throughout the community. And then also neighborhood grants that are given to the different neighborhoods across the community. And then also the demolition funding that would completely wipe out demolition at the NRC. Next, we have the community program, safety net programs, and we have funding for Willa Gill. This is the amount of money that we give Willa Gill annually. It's $180,000. Also, we have on the list a warming shelter, $65,000 that is dedicated from the city general fund. And then we also have the senior citizen rebate program, which consists of both the utility program and also sales tax. So we have $200,000 set aside in the city general fund for that. And then we also have the new community care center that we have in the 2024 budget, which is $3 million. And this is where we're looking to do wraparound services for the community, where we would be looking to possibly move Willa Gill, also provide services as far as showers, and also move some of the warming shelter there, and also other service provided departments that we have within unified government, such as human services. Also, some aging services could be provided out of this facility. So that's what that facility is for.
Okay, so I saw this in the budget and it's just someone kind of update me. So this particular center that we're wanting to fund out of debt. So, and I think it was what, $1 million this year, $2 million next year. Is that correct? In a
Yes.
CIP. So do we have numbers on operating cost and maintenance for that?
So with moving the Willa Gill Center there, it would be some of the same costs, but depending on what all we end up opening up there, we don't have a complete operating budget for those set up there yet. So we're under the intention that some of the things that we already do, we would just move that operating budget there with it. As
Gotcha.
far as like operating in a facility, we don't know what facility we will have yet, things like that. So we don't have an operating budget to per se run a facility yet, as far as the logistics of a facility and electric bills and things like that.
Gotcha. I guess the thought behind it, I think, is great. I don't know how much work went into this. Did we get consultants? Did we talk with other providers? And I know there's a task force that has been doing work, but I'm just curious, how did we come up with $3 million and then $3 million in debt to finance this?
So basically, we just I can't say we've had any worked with anyone on the outside to do anything. It's just something that the organization has been looking to do.
Gotcha. And it's no reflection on you and you all's work, Reggie. I have some reservations about putting $3 million in the CIP for debt for a plan that we don't know. Maybe in another budget session or in another year, when there has been time to really do that in-depth work. But $3 million to help our houseless folks, I can tell you right now, that's probably nowhere near the amount of money that's needed to really, really make the difference. But I don't know, there might be some other information. Again, this is new to me, so others that have been involved, please do educate me. But I do have some pause there for this particular year for the CIP. Thank you.
Commissioner Kane and then Stites, right.
Mayor, I agree. You know, we just now saw this. We have multiple buildings that we could convert and put some folks up. But I'm not sure $3 million is going to cover the total bill, so to speak. And I would just assume wait. So when we do our deep dive to see if we can find the $3 million. Instead of just all of a sudden say, we're going to set $3 million aside, you know, and there's a need, there's no doubt about that. But my concern is we're trying to get through a budget this year and work on next year's budget the split second we get done working on this budget. So I'd hate to handcuff ourselves with something like that at this time.
I have a question in regard, looking at these bullet points. It's my understanding that most of these funds, and correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, are federal funds, grant funds, and things of that nature. Am I correct?
No, so Willa Gill, the amount that's there, that's coming from the city general fund. Also, the warming shelter portion, the $65,000 is coming from the city general fund. And then the senior citizen rebate programs, that is coming from the city general fund. And then the community care center, that was something we were going to have come out of our debt fund.
Commissioner King.
You brought up some good points, and that's why we need a grant writer. So we can find some of the monies to fill these holes that we have. And I'm telling you, one grant writer is worth $125,000 or $150,000 a year for the first project that they work on. So I think we need to pursue one, and we're gonna have to pay them. And they'll fill some of these holes that we have. Thank you, Mayor.
Also, I will correct myself. So this is like Willa Gill, a portion of the funding comes from the city general fund. There is a grant for it. Warming shelter, there was a portion comes from the city general fund, but there was grant funding for it. But these portions are from the city general fund.
I thought, well, correct me, we know how much money to Willa Gill comes from community development. That the grants, because I know they came to us wanting more money. My understanding is really all their funds come from that. And then the warming shelters, I believe the first year was federal types of funds, ARPA, things of that nature. And I know going into this year, it would have to come from general fund because we don't have the funds going into next year. We used ARPA and other funds that were available to us. In your rebate program, I'm not sure if
That is all city general.
that's city general fund, and then the community care project. My understanding that a huge portion, I thought at least 2.5 of it was some type of residual ARPA funds or something like that. I don't know about the 500,000 to take us to 3 million, but my understanding that some of that money wasn't general fund money either. But I could be wrong. I'm just looking for clarity.
I guess I just want to add is what you're seeing here are examples that are fall into a traditional category of not fundamentally required local government services. So that's, I think, an important thing. I don't want to, I'll say it. Usually these are discretionary funding decisions by the commission when it comes to budget. It's and so it's easy for us to put these on a list for your consideration. Okay, these are examples are there. However, I think there's a balance to that. There exists because there's a need. And that's why historically you have acted on that. That does not preclude all these groups that we're talking about and programs to exempt themselves from the deep dive assessment that we're talking about. There may be a way that we have to say, you need to look at how you provide the services a little differently that is will rely less on UG funding. And you need to think like that. I think historically, we've had agencies come to us to increase their funding on a regular basis and without any deep accountability dive from us. So I think our fiscal situation is going to force us to ask anybody who we work for, whether it's the outside agencies as listed here, any not-for-profit that we give a grant to, all that, but that's part of it. Doesn't mean you're going to get all the money from those types of assessments. You need to be assured they need to go through a review, just like our internal departments need to go through the same review. So nobody has done this in a long time. And so it's going to be new. Yeah, there's going to be some fears, some people feeling threatened. But the bottom line is we want a viable UG government for the long term. And occasionally, sometimes you got to retrench the organization and those who support that organization, whether it's outside or internal departments. So these are just examples that are of that discretionary funding that have been approved by the commission over the years. The $3 million for the community center is in this year's budget for proposals because driven by the fact that sometime sooner or later, we have to deal with the Willa Gill relocation. So that's a need that we're going to be faced with. Whether we buy a building, whether we build a building, there's going to be a significant amount of expense. So the discussion of putting $3 million in there is to possibly find a building on a bus line that will serve that population well and find a new home for the agencies that support them, Willa Gill, and then there's the meals. Yeah, that, and then the Williams effort is that the desire, as I think Mayor and Reggie have been talking about, and a few of you have, is maybe we need to go to a different model and offer wraparound services as opposed to just dealing with symptoms of poverty. And hopefully some of those people will find themselves the help they need to become working citizens again, and to uplift their dignity for whatever reason they've been bruised over the years because of where they find themselves. So you're not going to get everybody out of poverty. You're not going to get everybody out of homeless, but at least you can try to help those who just want a little handout to know that they can help themselves with a little effort. So that's what that proposal is. We probably know it's not $3 million. That number came from our staff doing a survey of available buildings downtown, probably out to 15th Street and north and south about 3 or 4 blocks and see what's on the market with brokers. But then we had our facilities department go into a couple of those buildings to give us a renovation guesstimate. Of course, they're not getting there into the inspections to see is there structural integrity issues and all that, but just from their thumbnail look, they're using their experience to get us a dollar guesstimate of what it would take to rehab something. So it's a start. The desire to put a true plan together, we'd have to have that if we go the bond route anyway. And so this is just getting us started. It's your decision in your budget process if you want to go down that road. But we're having it here basically like all these things. They're here because there's been needs identified over the years and the needs haven't gone away. So.
Well, I agree that this is something that we don't need to have in our budget right now. We're talking about how we are trying to get out of the red line here. And we haven't even got out of it. And we're talking about adding more debt. And if I remember right, we had discussed about not having debt financing. We didn't want to have debt financing. And here we are looking at debt financing. I'm not sure what the urgency is here, right? So on Monday night at the EDNF meeting, I guess we are agreeing to include the Willa Gill Center to sell it for a sum of $10, right? That building's operating right now at the Willa Gill Center. So there's no need for us to have to do anything different of what we're doing right now. It can continue to operate just like they are right now. I'm not sure because the community college is wanting to build a new location, that this has now become the unified government's problem. If they want to help relocate Willa Gill, then ask them to pay more money than $10 for the whole block at 6th Street. I mean, we're putting this community college that's being built downtown on the backs of every taxpayer in Wyandotte County. And we have a building that is perfectly fine right now. I was there Monday night when we talked about the maintenance of that building. How long? Little did I know that there's already a plan in place to look at another building. And we're really just throwing a dart at $3 million. I'm not sure why Willa Gill is funded out of the city side, and then the warming center's out of the city side, the seniors program, rebate program, I'll leave that one out. But then we get to where the real big money's at. And then now all of a sudden it switches over to the county. Now we're going to fund it out of the county side, which has typically had the stronger budget. Well, I'm not sure what duplicate services and why the health department isn't at the table on this. This sure seems to me like a health department. It fits right under their purview. And are there, I don't know, I don't have a clue what a community care center is. No one's ever told me, but yet I'm being asked to say it's okay to fund $3 million out of our county budget. I'm not okay with it. And I would sure like to hear from the county health department, what services are they currently doing or not doing that would assist with this endeavor. So we don't need to do a thing. Let it continue to operate the way it is right now. Thanks.
Commissioner Davis.
Thank you. And I am mindful of time here. Two things. I did not want to pick at that. I do not want anybody watching this or in this room to think that I do not want us to do more substantive things for those that are in need. Far be it from me or any of my colleagues here or our staff. I just do not believe that we have all of our I's dotted and T's crossed to then take out $3 million of debt. Again, debt, not necessarily cash, but money that we're going to have to pay back plus interest for something that is very, very much not just a local, but a state and a national crisis right now. And so many of you know, and some of you may not, I committed to helping find funding through Churches United for Justice and partnering with them because they want to establish an affordable housing trust fund. And we are currently doing that work, and we're talking with cities like the city of Lawrence and the city of Wichita that have done some ambitious things to not just find sources of revenue, but ongoing revenue to help their houseless population. And it's very expensive and it's very extensive. And so, again, I think there are other folks that need to be at the table before we do that particular thing. The last thing I will say is I'm looking at the numbers, Reggie and Debbie. I don't think the numbers are accurate for the pilot relief as well. So we don't necessarily have to go through it, but if all you all did was add that $750,000 to the expenses, the numbers aren't adding up as neatly as I would like. And so I could be wrong, or I could have, I could be missing something, but if we can also check that pilot relief portion of this presentation and just its accuracy, that would be great as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, since no one else has their hand up real quick, I was gonna ask, I don't know that you ever got your question answered as far as the $2.5 million and where the fund was, where was that? So it's not, he does?
Well, the $2.5 million, we, very recently, we were awarded an extra grant for non-congregant housing. And this came up at the same time. And so right before the budget, right before we put this stuff together. And so there is, we just have to make sure that it's 100% qualified. But we also, if it doesn't qualify, it still means we have $2.5 million for something qualified. So, so this was just one of the options to, maybe it takes $3 million to purchase and then $2.5 million to renovate. It's just some of the things up in the air. And I think that's some of the frustration that Commissioner Davis is saying, is that let's see real numbers, not guesstimates. So.
Yes, I would have liked to have seen that $2.5 million that we've been awarded that I had. First time I've heard about.
Mayor, it came through Public Works and Safety Standing Committee. And then we were awarded, it's a home ARP, which is a form of ARPA.
For the end of their pool, right?
Thank you. Commissioner Markley has a question.
Not even a question, just a comment. So we have been through this process before during priority-based budgeting of identifying those items that were required to fund and not required to fund. And I would just point out, both for this and for the subsequent slides that are presented as examples of things that could potentially be cut because they're not required by state law. I would just point out for everyone's awareness that I think one thing we learned from that activity years ago was that it is the neighborhoods and the people that most need services that are the most impacted by us cutting the things we're not required to do. So this slide's a great example of that. Also true of our recreation related slides that come after this, because those address the land bank lots, which are mostly in our neighborhoods that are underprivileged to begin with. And it affects the families that can't afford to go play club ball or have a pool membership somewhere else. They have to have it here. And then lastly, transit is a slide after that. Again, we're not required to fund that, but if we don't fund it, it most impacts the people who most need services. So I think it's just worth noting that the things that are easiest to cut in terms of what we're allowed to cut are the things that impact our poorest populations.
Thank you. We'll take one last question from Commissioner Davis.
Not even a question, well, I guess it is a question, it's a request. If we can do kind of a deep dive into the vacancies. I know that there was 12 vacancies that were cut, but if we can get just some numbers on the vacancy rate and kind of what positions we are looking at, particularly long-term vacancies, I would define that 3 years or longer. That wasn't on the list of things that we can consider to cut or consider to mitigate. But I do think we should have a conversation about that. Thank you, Mayor.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut this meeting off. We do have a long commission meeting possibly. And some of these conversations that we were having will probably be conversations in the full commission meeting. We can pick up some of those topics. I've talked to the administrator. We will pick up. We do have another budget workshop next week. And so staff will pick up and where they left off and at the next budget meeting. So I apologize, but we do have to give our IT staff time to get the commission meeting set up for our full commission meeting. And so with that being said, thank you, staff. Thank you, administrator, and thank you for the commission. Real good questions. I think what we're seeing is real robust debate, and we're taking a hard look at our budget to see how we can not only find cost savings, but make sure that we're providing basic essential services that our community has come to expect from this unified government. So thank you so much. At this time, I will adjourn the special session and I make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Clerk, roll call, please.
Roll call, Markley,
Aye.
Stites, Davis.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Kiernan.
Aye.
Aye.
King. We are adjourned.
It'll be about 20 minutes for staff to set up. So we will re-adjourn and I apologize to the public that we went over, but our full commission meeting will start at, we will try and start it at 7:15 PM. So thank you. We adjourn.